Hey everyone, welcome to Educated to Employed, where we help students and recent graduates like you find and secure your dream job. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to get a job in the government sector. And with me today is Greg Vaughn. Greg is an international business specialist and consultant with over a decade of experience working in the public and private sectors, including governments of Canada and British Columbia, as well as Time Warner Inc., and the University of Singapore. In addition to his BA from UBC, Greg holds a master's in public administration from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Jason.
So I understand, Greg, that you started your career in government, but you've really jumped around quite a bit between the government and private sector throughout your career. So I was wondering, how did you find securing that first government job? As I know, speaking from experience myself, when I was a UBC student, as well as from a lot of other students I've spoken to, that it's very challenging, especially in this environment, to actually secure that government job. So I'm curious how you went about that.
Sure, yeah. I think that is a common perception that finding a job in the government is quite difficult. And you mentioned, starting my career in government. I mean, I have to say that there was no plan for building a career when I secured the first government job, which was really just an internship. It was an internship with a regional economic development agency in the government. And it was very much an entry-level job. There were not a lot of expectations in terms of what kind of skills and experience I would bring to the position. It was very much an opportunity for me to learn and to kind of get to know the government sector. But it was a very useful internship for me. I used that experience to secure additional internships, which included kind of going abroad and working in the academic sector, and then also working in the private sector. So I really credit that first internship as kind of laying the foundation for my career. And since then, I've bounced kind of back and forth between the public and private sector, and that's something that I always mention is that just because you end up going down one path doesn't mean you can't switch at certain points in your career when it makes sense. And the government is not a bad place to start because you can often get very good experiences starting with a government internship.
Now we'll dive into some of the specifics a little bit more in a bit, but I am curious in terms of the internship, how did you actually go about in securing that? Was it an opportunity you had found online? Was it through some other avenue? Where did you find that?
It was actually an internship that had been arranged through the university that I attended, which was the University of British Columbia. And they had a number of relationships, which is very, very common. University career departments have relationships with especially government departments, but also some private sector companies to kind of ease the way for students to gain these experiences. So I was very fortunate. It was still a competitive process. I still had to submit a resume, a cover letter, do an interview. I can't recall if there was a test of some kind, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's very common even for internships with government. So I think that was very kind of fortunate for me to have that experience and for the university to play a role in setting that up. But ultimately, I still had to do the kind of background work to be in a position to secure the internship in terms of preparing my resume and getting ready for the interview and all of that. But yes, I think that's something that students that are currently in university can really look to lean on their career services departments to provide that sort of support.
Perfect. And we'll come back to the strategies in a minute, but I am curious as well. There's probably some myths and common ones that go with working with government. I know when I was in university, it was this really exciting, idealistic idea of getting a job in government. And so I'm curious if you've seen some common myths that students or other people have about working in government, what those might be.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there are many myths about working in the public sector. some of which kind of put it on a pedestal, as you were talking about. I think particularly people that studied fields like political science or international relations, they really look at opportunities like the foreign service as being, kind of a life goal for them. And then others that are, very interested in specific topics like, I don't know, justice or social services. That's something that they would aspire to find that kind of job. I think, on the other hand, the myth of a lot of other government work is that it's boring, that it's a lot of paper pushing, that it's, let's say, kind of not as exciting as working in the private sector. And I think, on both sides of the coin, the kind of putting it on pedestal and also kind of demeaning it, it's both kind of incorrect, just in different ways. The reality is that there are so many government jobs. People don't realize it. I think people forget that it's not just the national government or the federal government that has, the sexy foreign service jobs. There's hundreds of thousands in the case of the US and Canada, for example, millions of people that work in the public sector. And they do everything from those jobs to many, many other jobs that touch on fields in terms of healthcare, law and justice, social services, education. You kind of name the field or name the private sector equivalent. There's a public sector equivalent that is working in that area as well. And in terms of the actual roles, there's all sorts of roles in there that are not just titles like policy analyst, for example, which is a title that a lot of students that study political science will be familiar with. There's project manager, there's HR manager, there's marketing assistant. I mean, basically every type of job that you can envision in the private sector exists in the public sector. And so I would say, when you're considering a public sector career, or you're just considering a career in general, don't forget to look at the other levels of government. So you have city government, you have regional government, you have the state or provincial government, then you have the federal government. And within all of these governments, there's a multitude of departments and also associated agencies that are hiring, that are considered public sector work. And so I think it's very difficult to make any generalizations about kind of the subject matter of working in the public sector and the type of career that you could pursue. So that's definitely one myth. Perhaps another myth is around pay. And I think a lot of people resist going into the public sector because they think that, let's say the upside is capped, and it's really not, it'll be stable, but not really lucrative. And I think, something to keep in mind is that, there's not too many fields where someone with a very kind of generalist background can, within 5 to 10 years in their career, be closing in on 6 figures, and also have the benefits of, let's say, a pension, could be 4 weeks of vacation, maternity and paternity leave, extended healthcare benefits, all of those things that people need to factor in when they're considering a career. And it's something that people think about later in their career, but they might not think about at the very beginning. But it all should be considered compensation. And so you need to think about that as well. And then also, the skills that you gain when you're working in government can be translated over to private sector careers, which have kind of a much more open upside, let's say, when it comes to salary. So I think those are two, very common myths of working in the public sector. There's many more, but those are probably the top two.
So you alluded to this already, but I think it's really interesting because for a lot of students, I think they assume that you have to be, an international relations major or a political science major, or maybe something in those kind of realms, maybe economics, in order to really go into government. But what I gather from what you're saying is that's not necessarily the case. So if I was let's say, an English major, for example, would you still say there's opportunities in government for somebody like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the that is one of the benefits of zeroing in on the public sector as an employer. If you've studied something that maybe doesn't have a direct application in the private sector, like English is a good example. Oftentimes, the people that are hiring for entry-level positions, they're really looking for an undergraduate degree as kind of a baseline, and then some other, skills and experience, which could be volunteering. It could be languages that you can speak. It could be writing that you've done on topics that are interesting to you. They're not looking for you to be a subject matter expert. Which, for example, if you were pursuing a marketing job in the private sector, they would be very interested in somebody with a marketing degree, right? I mean, of course there are ways to get in there if you're a humanities or liberal arts major, but it takes a lot more work, and the hiring manager would consider you kind of let's say a candidate out of left field. Whereas if you're pursuing a public sector job and you have a sociology degree or an English degree or a psychology degree, that really is not unusual. And the second part of that is that, once you get in to the public sector, there's lots of routes for moving up. So, when I took that entry-level job internship with the public sector, once I had that on my resume that I worked in the public sector and I had a reference from the public sector, it made getting another job in the government much, much more straightforward, because they knew that I had worked in that and that I had some degree of success. So, that's another thing to keep in mind is, you may look at a job and think that maybe you think you're overqualified for it, or it is just paper pushing or what have you. But you shouldn't look at it in that with that lens, because, what you want to look at is, okay, how is this my kind of entry point to building my career and getting in there? And oftentimes, it's only when you're in the government that you can see all of the jobs that are available. There's many, many jobs that are only internal to public sector employees. And, you don't have a chance. You're not even going to see them if you're not within the system. So I've seen many people move up from administrative assistants to being, senior managers and above in the public sector.
So you talked about how, in comparison to, say, a marketing type job where a company would really look at your experience related to marketing, right? In government, when you're applying as a student, do you need specific work experience or work experience in general to really get you, past the post when applying? Or is your experience, say, with volunteering and just with being in, I don't know, different programs within the university or different clubs and so on, enough for that first job, maybe along with some experience you've had, working in a restaurant or these other very general early career experiences that you might have? But would you say that's enough, or do you really need to find some sort of work experience in advance of actually applying?
Yeah, I think that, it's important to build up your experience, even if it's outside of formal employment. And all of that work that you do in terms of volunteering, or let's say even like writing a blog or writing articles on a subject that interests you, building, let's say, like a LinkedIn profile, all of this work that you can do without having a formal job title is still going to be extremely beneficial when you submit your application for a job. And the reason for that is that, unlike a private sector job where, you can have a kind of, let's say, a personal connection with the hiring manager, and they can really think about you in terms of your personal fit and they like you and all of that. With government hiring, it's a bit different. There is going to be a list of qualifications that they have, and also kind of attributes, or they call them competencies, that you need to address in one way or another. And for entry-level jobs, they'll still have that list, but they may be more flexible in how they apply it. So, for example, proving that you're a good writer, which is just kind of a basic qualification that almost every job in government will have. If you just say, oh, I got an A in my English class and and I, got good grades, so clearly I can write. That's not going to be as compelling as if you say, here's my portfolio of articles, blogs that I wrote about international relations because I'm very interested in that subject. And I kept a site active while I was in university where I would just kind of write things that I thought were interesting. Here are some examples. And they can actually read it with their own eyes and say, okay, yeah, this person, not only are they a good writer, they're a good writer, but they're also kind of passionate about it. And people that are passionate about one subject tend to really kind of dig into whatever work that they're doing. So I think that is a really good strategy. Volunteering, if the competency is something like, let's say initiative, right? I mean, it's very hard to prove you have initiative just based on your university experience. You can try and make a case for that, but it's difficult. Whereas if you were a volunteer every week or every month for some cause that you cared about, and you have a letter or you have a reference from the person that oversaw you, then then you can make the case like, look, it's not just me telling you that. Here's a third party verifying it, and I meet that core competency. So I think all of that prep work that students or recent graduates do contributes to their ability to secure that job. And you don't need to have 5 fancy internships before you pursue an entry-level job in the government.
You talk about passion, which I think is important. And so when somebody actually wants to decide whether or not they even want to apply for a government job, do they need to be, I don't know, passionate about government or the type of position? What is it really that, what is that reason that people want to work in government, and why should someone work in government, and why should someone choose not to go down that path?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would put a caution on the word passion when it comes to people that are just leaving, university trying to determine the course of their career. You don't know what you don't know. In your years in university, you may or may not have been exposed to an issue that you kind of fell in love with, became passionate about, and that's what you want to dedicate your life to. I think for some people, they'll have that experience. For the vast majority of people, you won't know what you're passionate about coming out of university, and that's okay, because you've got a whole long time to figure that out. So I think when you're asking yourself, should I pursue a public sector job or a private sector job, you should think more about what your interests are and how they cross over with your skills, right? So if you have an interest in, let's say, justice, you have an interest in criminal justice, but you're not going to be a lawyer. You're just interested in that subject matter. Well, there's a Department of Justice that will have entry-level jobs for people to be administrative assistants or what have you. And those are the jobs where you can enter the system and have that experience and be exposed to it and decide if this is really something that interests you and you want to kind of move up the ladder in government. I think you can look at people in the field that are at higher levels. We have more access to people and their careers through LinkedIn than ever before, and you can search out people that are at a manager level or above in the department that you have some degree of interest in. You can see how did they get there, and you'll see what their career progression was. Oh, they were a program coordinator, then they became a manager, then they became a director, now they're the whatever assistant deputy minister. What does their education look like? Okay, they got an undergraduate degree in this field that's kind of like mine. But 5 years later, they did a master's degree in this field. Okay, that gives me an idea. I see a few of those. I can get a sense of what how people's career developed, and I can think about whether or not that's a fit for what I'm interested in. So I think that's a good way of doing it. I had jobs in the public sector where when I wanted to figure out if I wanted to keep going in that direction, I looked at the people that were 2-3 levels above me and ask myself, is that the type of person that I want to be, or job that I want to do? And in a couple of cases, it meant I left because I looked above and I said, no, actually, that's not my interest. So it goes both ways, right? So I think that's something that you can do even as a student in trying to determine if the field is interesting. You can also reach out to people and ask them to have a coffee or have a virtual coffee. These days, you'll be surprised how many people will be flattered that you're interested in them, and would take the time to talk to you about what their career paths look like. And oftentimes, if you're still in university, the university can make the arrangement to do that as well. So I think that's that's one thing that you can do.
So on that note, let's shift a little bit and dive a little deeper into this idea around like actual strategies to get a job. So traditionally, of course, we think a lot about resumes, cover letters, interview skills, these kinds of things. And you can find a myriad information online on tactics around that. Is that the route you would suggest, is working really hard on making your resume perfect, all these typical things? Or are there other avenues such as, virtual coffees and networking, for example, that you would recommend in addition or instead of these typical routes?
Yeah, it's definitely in addition to, because at some point, someone is going to be looking at your resume and cover letter and deciding, is it any good? And I mean, in terms of just how it reads, is it straightforward? Does it cover the points that were outlined in the job description? And we can talk about how government job descriptions are different than private sector job descriptions and interviews, for that matter, if you want to. But I think, yes, it needs your resume and cover letter need to be good. They need to have no spelling errors or anything like that. You need to spend time on them. On the other hand, what is going to get them interested in you is totally different question. It's some of the things that we've already discussed in terms of, your the activities that you've done in the past that kind of show skills that you hold and can be applied. I think the other thing, there are skills that you can gain that are much more applicable to the workplace than you will learn in university. So there are job skills that they are going to be looking for, and if you have them, that will make you stand out. So for example, take something like PowerPoint. Almost every workplace that I've been in has relied on PowerPoint as an application for lots of different things. And they will be really happy to have someone come in at an entry level that can say, look, I'm pretty sure I'm in the top 10% of recent graduates in terms of their PowerPoint skills, right? I mean, that will impress them. Another skill like, let's say, graphic design, there are online platforms. You don't have to have a degree in design to be able to acquire, really good skills. And if you were getting hired into let's say like a communications department for a government agency, your ability to create posters and other kind of visual, documents or designs, that's going to have that's going to leave a very good impression, because they can see you kind of jumping in and doing things immediately. Whereas if you just have kind of your baseline skills from university, it's not going to be quite as clear exactly what you can do when you hit the ground. So I think building up practical skills that you can add to your resume, and you can do that through taking online courses. There's Udemy, there's all sorts, YouTube has a million lessons on different types of practical skills. And it may take, a week for you to become in the top like 20% of people in a certain kind of skill. So I would highly recommend you think about those type of skills to add to the baseline skills that you have from university.
Yeah, the presentation skills is interesting. One of my first internships was with our local WCB, WorkSafe BC here. And the reason I mainly got the job was because I actually knew how to build PowerPoint presentations, which is something I had learned, on my own throughout university. So I think that's, extremely important. So you mentioned resumes and things specific to government, and I think that is important. Are there things you should do differently, or just in terms of, I guess, the application process in general? Obviously, it's different than, say, a private sector application process. How can you become really good, especially when you don't have a lot of experience to put in your resume or your cover letter? How can you become good enough to present yourself in a way that at least gets you in the door to have that conversation, that interview with, a prospective job?
Well, I think this advice applies no matter what level of government job that you're applying to, whether it be a senior executive position or a, administrative kind of role. When government hiring managers look at your resume and to a lesser extent your cover letter, they've got a sheet that's right next to them, and they're ticking off whether or not you have met a certain requirement that was detailed in the job description that was posted publicly. So no one has an unfair advantage here. Everyone can see what they're being graded on, right? And so it's important when you prepare your resume that you address every single requirement and competency that they're looking for. And so that means often that, it became quite trendy to have like a one-page resume, and I can see the benefit if you're applying to a private sector job, it looks really stylish and all of that sort of thing. But it doesn't work in government, because you need to address all of those competencies and all of those requirements, and you do it kind of point by point by point by point, so that they can't, take all of points because you didn't explain why you're a good writer, or what have you. You really have to be detailed in addressing those points. So I think that's really critical. And then again, there's going to be an amount of points awarded based on, did you have spelling mistakes in your resume and cover letter? And I have seen literally probably thousands of resumes and cover letters, and I'm always shocked how many of them contain spelling and grammatical errors. And they automatically, yes, they lose the points, but even if they come in high enough on to get an interview, I always remember that person had a bunch of mistakes in their resume and cover letter.
Yeah.
And to me, that shows either they literally didn't know how to spell that word, or maybe even worse, they don't know how to use spell check. Yeah. But worse than that, they're not very conscientious, and they just
no attention to detail.
Yeah, exactly. So all bad things. So you just make sure you have a couple of friends or your parents or whatever look at your resume and cover letter and make sure those obvious things are taken care of, because that's the easiest way to get kicked out of a competition.
I would also say, put it down and come back to it maybe a day later or something like that. Like, try not to, of course we all procrastinate and leave these things to the last minute, but when you're in the weeds looking at something for so long, you're just going to not realize that there was a grammatical error or a spelling mistake because you've just been looking at it way too long. So put it down, step away from it for a few hours a day, however long you can, then come back and read it again, especially if you don't have access to someone else that can review it for you. I've found personally that's helped a lot. Yeah. Is there anything else with that in terms of strategies that have worked really well for you that you might recommend to someone, and anything we haven't covered at this point?
Well, I think, if you have the opportunity to interview for the job, that introduces a whole kind of new set of, challenges and opportunities to impress the employer. And I think, this is where practice can really make a difference with interviews. One of the most beneficial things that I did when I was still in university was to actually record myself doing an interview. So it was a practice interview, and I had somebody asking me questions, and then I could really painfully go back and watch myself giving the answers. And it was a traumatic experience, because you see, all sorts of tics that you have, nervous tics, as well as, the ums and the ahs and the likes and all of those things that, the interviewer is looking at and noticing as well. And so, going through that process and improving your ability to interview is important. And that's something that, I have constantly focused on throughout my career as I've interviewed for more senior roles. I was in a public sector job and up for a pretty senior position. And I decided to hire a interview and career coach. And I did, I think it was 3 sessions with this coach, who helped me to kind of craft my answers to the level of job that I was applying to. and really, change kind of the frame of how I engaged with the employer in the interview, because it was a leadership position, which had, different kinds of emphasis than it would be needed in more of a middle manager or more junior role. And I told a couple of people in my department about it. They were quite surprised that I had gone outside of government, hired someone that does this for a living, and paid good money to get the support. And they were surprised, but I got the job. And for me, if you think about the investment that I made, which I don't know, it was a few $100 or something like that to hire this person, the increase in my salary, I mean, I think within a few weeks I would or less would have paid that back.
Right.
So to me, it just makes an infinite amount of sense to invest in yourself continuously throughout your career. And I think that's even important at the front end of your career, when you're trying to make these kind of decisions around, what kind of job should I apply to, as well as how can I improve my my odds of securing one of these jobs, including, around interview skills. Spending some money and time on these sorts of things is, a good investment, because it pays off really quickly. And you know what? It's not. You'll never feel like you wasted the money. It was, it always feels like a good investment. You will improve in certain aspects that'll be relevant not only, for example, when you're doing an interview, but just in your day-to-day dealings with people, being able to present yourself in a more positive light.
With the advent of Zoom calls these days anyways, the ability to have a conversation with somebody on video or obviously in person, any sort of meeting setting is so crucial for any job you're in regardless. So I think that's so hyper valid. Are in terms of like the interviews specifically, are there things in government interviews that are a lot different than, say, a private sector interview that you should be aware of? Whether that's, I know in government sometimes there's a lot more, or seemingly a lot more panel type of interviews, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there anything else as well that you should be wary of?
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of things that you need to think about when you're going into the interview. The same qualifications that they graded you on to get through the resume stage, they're also looking at that in the interview stage. And you'll know based on the questions that's what they're doing. And so you need to be prepared to demonstrate how you meet those. And the difference between the resume and the interview is that you're taking a bullet point and putting into a narrative, to a story that reflects that you hold this qualification or you have this skill or experience. So I think, the more preparation that you do in terms of identifying what stories about yourself you're going to tell the panel, the better, and to make sure that you know how you're going to use that story in relation to what qualifications. So you really have to kind of do a bit of a matrix in terms of, all right, for this story, I've got, or for this qualification, I've got these 3 stories, and really do the work in terms of, building that out and knowing that no matter what qualification they touch on, you've got a story to tell about that proves that you hold that skill or qualification. So that takes work. But once you've done it the first time, you'll be surprised how many jobs have the same type of requirements, like teamwork or taking the initiative or writing or what have you. And so that's a good investment of time to do that. I think, you have to keep in mind that there's 2 different perspectives on the panel. There will always be 2 different perspectives. The one perspective is kind of ticking the box qualifications, making sure that they can justify that hiring decision because, you have articulated to them that you meet all those requirements. On the other hand, there'll be the hiring manager who would be likely your manager. And the type of things that they're thinking about are, do I like this person? Do I see them fitting into the team? Are they coachable? These sorts of more soft skills. Do they present themselves well? These sorts of things that are really important. And also, what part of my job can they help me with? Like how are they going to assist me? And I think, the concern that a lot of hiring managers have when they hire, especially kind of entry-level employees, is that actually this person is going to create more work for me because I'm going to have to manage them, and they don't have the skills and experience, and they're going to make bad judgments that I'm going to have to fix and all that sort of thing. So, the more that you can show the hiring manager that you're there to solve problems for them, not to create new ones, that's going to be really valuable. And the way that you might think about doing that is to look at the hiring manager's career history. Again, LinkedIn, very valuable for this. Understand what kind of tasks they have. What are their what does their day likely look like, and what skills do you have or could you gain that would make their life easier. So, let's say that it's a business development or an economic development manager in the government, and that they are going to have to use like a client relationship management software, like a Salesforce or something like that. If you come in and you say, I'm actually quite familiar with Salesforce, I'm not an expert, but I'm learning right now, I'm taking an online course in it and I'm getting better. And I would hope I could help you out with that sort of thing. They're going to go, okay, wow, this person, they're super eager, and I can see them, over time kind of taking that off my plate. Sounds great. That's definitely a plus for this candidate. So those sorts of things I think can make a big difference.
I love that. And the one thing I've done in the past as well is look at some unique thing about the individual that I might be able to relate to and try and bring that up at some point in the interview, just as a rapport builder. So, maybe we both do martial arts, so that's something I bring up, or they've traveled to a place that I really enjoyed, and I have some commentary on that I can mention, and I find that helps build that rapport a little bit quicker, because then they have something else to remember you by, just like you're talking about with your Salesforce example. It's, again, something else to remember you by that all these other candidates that they're speaking to might not have. So I think that relatability and that ability to find examples of how you can really help them is so super important. So I think that's great. Being conscious of time here, I think we're about at that time. So I wanted, though, to just give you an opportunity to give one last tip. If you had to provide students and recent graduates with the one thing, the one takeaway from this conversation or anything else related to how to get that job in government, what would that be?
Well, I think, specifically we're talking about jobs with government. And my one tip would be to, not dismiss it first of all, to understand kind of the huge variety of government jobs that exist, and that, no matter what your major was in college or university, there is definitely, a role that you could fit into. And I just think it's, it's such a dynamic sector, which might sound strange to people, but government is changing very quickly. People are retiring, new technologies are being adopted. Governments are trying to be more efficient, more tech savvy. It actually is a very exciting industry to be part of. So keep an open mind when you're looking for opportunities, and yeah, I think it's worth exploring.
Well, thank you, Greg. Do appreciate your time. I think there's some hugely valuable insights there for people. And, thank you to everyone who's listening and viewing. I hope that was beneficial. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below, and we'll certainly respond as quickly as possible to those. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.